Want a little grace, but who's gonna say a little grace for me? What's up, nerds? This is Matthew Keel, the goofy half of NGR Radio. Hope you all are having a wonderful 2017. Yeah, my first one this year. I'm not gonna do the whole Happy New Year thing because it's too late. Um, but I've actually spent. I think the last time I did this was Black Friday 2016. Actually, you know what? Full disclosure, I actually went and looked. That's when I did it. Um, so I've been sort of thinking about how I could structure this a little bit. I did not intend to be away for 3 months, but it happened. So here I am, rock you like a hurricane. I've been sort of I've this year specifically with a lot of my activity on DNAnetwork.net. I've been really gearing up. Music reviews and things like that. So I think I'm probably going to direct these to a more music focused thing. I don't know if I'm going to do album reviews or anything like that here. I might just I've had a lot of energy in terms of writing, so I've thought about both writing about new stuff and old stuff. But then if I do one or if I do both, it's sort of like am I just going to talk about what I'm writing here and then sort of cannibalize the content, I think would be the term. I don't want to do that, so I'll probably just save this for when I want to talk about things I'm excited for or things I think are cool, or if there's an old album that comes out as a reissue that I really like, I might just sort of talk about it a little bit here rather than write up a piece, because by the time a lot of that stuff happens, there's plenty of written word about those things out there, probably better than I can do it, but at least I can share my brand of music nerdery with the DNA community, which I'd prefer to do anyway. I actually have some stories to talk about here. It is February 7th. We are 2 days after what was actually a pretty awesome Super Bowl. I'm not a fan of American football. Yes, I'm going to call it American football because it's not played with the feet. It's not football. It's American football because we did it wrong, in my opinion. But I will say this: I've gotten to many an argument over the years about why I dislike Tom Brady. But that guy he orchestrated a masterful comeback in what was probably one of the best Super Bowls I can remember seeing. And as someone who does not follow the NFL season to season, game to game, week to week, that was a cool thing to see, and that's something that's what I want out of a Super Bowl. I want it to be. I kind of like it when the halves are two different stories rather than just being, the first half, the team that's going to win gets far enough ahead and then just sort of puts the brakes on. But I think, Tom Brady proved why you don't discount a genius or I don't want to say genius, but like a legend. You don't walk in like I don't think for some reason I kept thinking about the George Foreman Muhammad Ali fight where you see Foreman just pounding the shit out of Ali, but then Ali just all of a sudden turns around and wins because he was just waiting for George to get tired. And there's that famous George Foreman anecdote where, Ali was curled up next to him and he heard Ali whisper, "Is that all you got, George?" And George was like, "Uh-oh." So, and that was exactly how Tom Brady did it. It's a same thing. Atlanta's defense is good, but Atlanta's defense is young. And when a young team gets ahead, they think it's over. They're like, "Oh, the math mathematically it's done. It is over now. And the folly of youth shows up, and Atlanta just could not hang with what Brady was dealing out to them anymore. And I mean, the man, that coach and that quarterback won 4 Super Bowls before you got to them. If you thought it was over because you were up that far at halftime, that's your fault. If my boy Brian Pelfrey watches this, I know he's a diehard Atlanta fan. I'm sorry your boys went out like that, but from my eyes, that's what happened. And I don't think we could talk about Deflategate or the cheating or whatever. We could talk about that, but man still has 5 rings. He has more rings than any other quarterback, any other player in NFL history. So, I mean, unless the record books are, unless I'm misremembering something, but I think Terry Bradshaw won 4 with the Steelers, and I think and I think Montana won 4. I don't think Aikman won 4. I don't know who else won 4, but you cannot argue that man's place in football history or American football history anymore. It's inarguable. The stats went out. I don't think he's the greatest ever, because the greatest is a different thing. Statistically the best, yes. But I have my favorites, and you can't take that away from me. Just because you won all those things doesn't make you my favorite, Tom. Sorry, dude. But congratulations, you are now officially a undisputed legend. Good for you. Now, back why I'm here, because I don't know anything about football. I know a little bit about music, and that's what I want to talk about. 3 album announcements came out in the past couple weeks. One of my favorite bands since the year 2000, the band Spoon. A little 5 or 6 piece out of Austin, known for putting out pretty good, they got unfairly lumped into the alt country thing in the early aughts, which was silly just because they were from Texas. But they put out some phenomenal rock and roll now. Is it your classic rock with a guitar solo? But they do their thing well. They've their album Kill the Moonlight, their album Girls Can Tell, their album They Want My Soul, I think it's Ga or Ga 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 Ga. I think that's how you say it. They've put out some phenomenal albums. If you haven't heard them, you should. And their first single off their new album, Hot Thoughts, coming out St. Patrick's Day this year, is pretty good. And yeah, check it out. And if you have time to listen to the rest of their stuff, if you have a Spotify subscription or go on YouTube, do whatever you want. Hopefully, you might be interested in it the same way that I am. Also, one of a band that seems to always crop up whenever I'm doing an album of the year list. I think every time they've released an album, they've been in my top 10. I don't even know if it's because I think I don't even know if it's because they're objectively that good, or if I'm just a fan of really catchy guitar pop. But the New Pornographers are releasing Whiteout Conditions April 7th, and it'll probably be, I can almost tell you what it's going to be. It's going to be 12 to 14 songs. There's 3 different songwriters, all of which are very distinct. You have AC Newman. I don't know how to say the guy from Destroyer's name. I think it's Dan Bejar, or it might be Behar. And Nico Case, who's a phenomenal songwriter with a good voice. And it'll be a solid album, if nothing else, because that's generally what they tend to put out. The first album, or the first single they announced, I think last week. I don't remember what it's called, but it's more new Pornographers, and that gets me excited. A band I recently was introduced to, Future Islands. I've not dug into their catalog extensively, but their album Singles is really good. It's not a best of, despite the name leading it to be that, but it's they kind of have a synthy dream poppy sound, but the lead singer, whose name I do not know, he kind of, this is gonna sound pejorative and like I'm leveling a joke at him, but he has one of those white guy voices that kind of sounds like a black guy. Not so much like Rick Astley did, not so much like Michael McDonald does, but he had when he turns on that when he turns that on, he kind of sounds like he's a black dude, in a good way, in a very good way. I do like their sound, and I'm kind of excited for their new stuff. I think this will be their first album since 2014. So I have some homework to do before their album comes out on April 7th, alongside one of my favorite Canadian bands, New Pornographers. I'll start over. A band that that I really like, Daft Punk. If you've never gotten me on the Daft Punk conversation, it's probably better because I could just go for a very long time. They announced something interesting. They announced a pop-up shop, I've never been to a pop-up shop. I know Kanye did a lot of them around Life of Pablo, and probably before that. I know it's not like they're not reinventing some wheel here, but it's sad. It's on the other side of the country in LA on Melrose Avenue. I think it's like 8818 Melrose Avenue, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. from February 11th to February 19th. There's going to be a pop-up shop that Daft Punk is sponsoring, and it's going to have merch, as most pop-up shops do, probably limited edition stuff or very fancy exclusive stuff. But the cool thing is the helmets are going to be on display for like the first time ever. Why do I think that's cool? I don't know. Because if I ever had enough money, the time, and maybe if my tax return is good enough, I will invest in getting myself a Daft Punk helmet just so I can go as one of them for Halloween. Because that's the kind of dumb you're dealing with with me. That's just me. Don't really know what else to say. But if you've never heard Daft Punk and you like dance music, you should listen to Daft Punk. Their most recent album, 2013's Random Access Memories, is amazing. Their album before that, not the Tron soundtrack, though the Tron soundtrack is good. I don't really see that. Yes, it's a Daft Punk album, but it's one of those things that it's like how people never really called any album Beck put out after Odelay before Guero, because he put out like 3 albums between Odelay and Guero, but none of those were considered the follow-up to Odelay. That's kind of what the Tron soundtrack feels like in Daft Punk's catalog to me. Their last proper studio album before Random Access Memories was Human After All, which was not good. And it was 2005, 6-ish. And that was 4 years after their popular masterpiece, Discovery. If you've never heard One More Time, where have you been? Either you were born post its popularity, which means you are too young to probably deal with me, which is fine, or you've kind of been under a rock, because One More Time was kind of inescapable in a way that not many pop songs have been since. Like maybe it was everybody knew One More Time. If you didn't know it, I'm sorry for you, and you should go listen to it. But my favorite album by theirs is still their debut, Homework, and they have 2 really good live albums, which I've gone on record here and said I don't like live albums, and both of theirs are exceptions to that. So check out Daft Punk if you've not heard them. Today, February 7th, 2017, marks legendary hip hop producer, late legendary hip hop producer, Jay Dilla. It would be his 43rd birthday. And if you've not listened to anything Jay Dilla did with like Slum Village or his solo albums, specifically Donuts from like 2005, 2006, you need, and if you've not listened to that and you don't like hip hop, fine, you're probably better off. But if you like hip hop and you've never listened to it, listen, because you'll find something there that you'll latch onto and be like, whoa, this is really cool. And Jay Dilla's kind of, he took up the mantle that like Pete Rock had in like the early to mid 90s, where he was sort of the producer that everybody wanted to work with. And I kind of feel like Jay Dilla was taken away from us in a way that is really, really sad, because still to this day, his influence is there. And I feel like hip hop has not moved very far despite it moving on. So yeah, Jay Dilla, if you've not heard Jay Dilla's Donuts, you should. But MF Doom, one of my personal, probably my favorite working MC today, he just released a little video on, Jay Dilla's birthday, paying a moment of silence to his former collaborator. Nothing really spectacular, but it kind of gives me an excuse to say, hey, maybe Madvillainy 2 might happen this year, which is cool. If you've not heard Madvillainy from 2004, it's one of the best underground hip hop records ever. And it's also part of it wasn't really a trilogy, but MF Doom released 3 albums that year. One of them was under his moniker Victor Vaughn, which is amazing. And then his album from that year, Food, has some of my favorite Doom verses on it, as well as the first in the Madvillainy series, maybe, that he did with Madlib, who is another amazing producer. If you've not heard any of Madlib stuff, check it out. Beat Conductor knows what he's doing. Beat Conductor knows beats. That's why they call him the Beat Conductor. And then what I'm really going to talk about, I'm going to gush for a little bit, because like I talked about at the beginning of this, this is probably going to be a place where I talk about classic albums that have just meant something to me over the years. And there's an album that came out in the year 2000, who's the band Avalanches. They released their debut, Since I Left You, in the year 2000. And last year, they followed it up with their second album. They waited 16 years. Why not? They released Wildflower, which ended up being my favorite of the year. And I think that album took some flack, mainly because it's not Since I Left You, but I don't think any album really is. I mean, it's kind of, Since I Left You was kind of like, I don't want to say the Ramones' first album, but it's kind of like the Nevermind the Bollocks by the Sex Pistols, where there's just that explosion of energy and je ne sais quoi that you can't really bottle up again. But Avalanches finally reissued it on vinyl this year, and I've been listening to it a lot. They reissued it in blue vinyl, which I have a copy of, as well as this one. This one is the black one. That'll be the one that I listen to the most of, because I don't want to ruin the blue one. But this is actually has worked its way into my 10 favorite albums of all time. It is what the Avalanches do. They're both of their albums are predominantly sample based. Now, plenty of people will look at them and be like, "Oh, well, they're just rip-off artists." I If you were to listen to Wildflower or Since I Left You, there are samples that are obvious and samples that are not. However, the way that they use them is the way that it's very similar to the turn of the 20th century when surrealist art was kind of a thing. Pablo Picasso and Marcel Duchamp sort of exercised this principle called found art, where they would take something that they've found and repurpose it for a different way. I think that if you look at it, if you look at the Avalanches that way, that's how that's their MO. That's what they do. And Since I Left You, there's very much a formula to it, because they usually have one main sample as sort of the anchor for the song, and then they'll actually switch moods throughout the song with other samples, and it actually creates a very interesting thing where, without having a singer or a songwriter or a band, not only does it sound like a band, but they sound like pop songs without words. Now, this doesn't sound like you take your favorite pop band's songs and just take the words out of it and you have instrumentals. It sounds like they are fully formed, fully fleshed out, and it's four sides of vinyl that are one cohesive piece that goes from, happy, sad, loud, quiet, fast, slow. There are so many really cool moments, in my opinion, on this record that it's one of those things that if someone ever gets into the conversation with me about music, I usually say you should really listen to that. And granted, probably 60% of the people who actually do, if they do, they usually come back and go, "Hey, not my thing," and I'm like, "That's fine." But I feel like I feel that's one of those albums that I really just want to share with people, because every time I listen to it, I hear something different. It's like the aging, people in the 80s, how they would always say, "Oh, I still listen to Van Morrison's Astral Weeks and I hear different stuff," which that could mean any number of things. But Since I Left You by the Avalanches is a solid listen. The opening, where it starts off with an acoustic guitar and then leads into a Jackson 5 song, which I can't remember because I can't recall it. However, you hear Michael Jackson as a child singing "Since I Left You, I've Found the World So Blue." Where I actually found what song that was, I think a week or so ago, and I'm meant to write it down, but I didn't because me. But it starts off with a very sunny, tropical feel, yet there's that melancholy dichotomy of that sample. So it kind of, if you really latch onto that, and it takes you to a certain place, but then just sort of guides you on a trip through the rest of it, where you will get, it'll make you want to dance. It'll make you just nod your head, and it'll be contemplatively quiet, or at least lower key than you're expecting. I mean, one of my favorite tracks on the album is Close to You, that is anchored by a treated vocal that's really high, and I'm not going to try, but it's starts off with a really high pitch "Close to You," and I forget. I think it's Minnie Riperton, but I might be wrong. I think that's who it is. I could be wrong, or it might be treated Carpenters. You know, the "Why Do Birds Suddenly Appear," but it's just "Close to You." It's not the whole. It's not the rest of that terrible ass song. But then it drives a little bit, has a nice little stomp, and then it completely shifts into Kid Creole and the Coconuts, Stool Pigeon, in a way that it's almost like call and response within the song. It's sample call, sample response, but they're not saying the same thing, and it's one of those things that like I find myself singing along to almost every time I hear it. And if that's not the sign of you liking something, I don't know what is. But my favorite thing about this album is how you get to the penultimate track. It's called, let me look. It's called Live at Domino's. That is actually it. It opens with a weird. It opens with a weird sample of a chorus of females going, "Flight 22 is off to Honolulu. Flight 22 is off to Honolulu," and then it just fades into this four on the floor, pounding rhythm and bass that's just in your face, and with little synths just sort of dancing around it in a way that you could it's a song you could clean the house to, or it's a song you could work out to, or it's a song that you could, if you need to, if you're at that time at the office where you really need to get some stuff done so you can get to that meeting on time, you put that on, all of a sudden you're working. It's a very kinetic track in a contagious way where it'll force the listener to just be like, you need to be active. That's exactly what it is. And then it closes, and then it just ends, I think, with like a splash, literal water splash. And then you get the end of the album, which is called Extra Kings, which it shifts from like a beautiful orchestra and some treated guitar, and the end is actually kind of it's kind of like it's calculated and dumb, but in a way that's believable. And it's actually from I believe it's another song. I don't think it's the same Jackson 5 song, but the vocals are I just can't get you ever since the day I left you. So the entire vibe throughout Since I Left You is actually Since I Left You, which I think that's cool. Now, in terms of sample-based instrumental albums, while this may be my favorite, there are several out there that are probably better. Earlier in this video, I mentioned Jay Dilla's Donuts, probably more revered than this guy. Fine, I can be fine with that. Another one would probably be DJ Shadows Introducing, as would be his follow-up to Introducing, The Private Press, mainly because he takes samples and you don't recognize them. You just don't. At least I don't. I always wish there would be a sort of an annotation to figure out where that stuff comes from, but to my knowledge, there is not. And if someone can point me in the way to one, please do. But if you like vinyl, or you like reissues, or you're just interested in trying something new that you might not have heard, and you've not heard Since I Left You by the Avalanches, check it out. In fact, if you listen to it and hate it, tell me about it. I'd like to have a discussion. I'll talk to you in the comments. That's what they're for. Or you could just do the thumbs down, or you could be like, first, or Matt's an idiot. I'll I'll take it all in stride. But I'm actually going to end it there. And I hope you all have a wonderful day or wonderful evening. Valentine's Day is a week away, so if you're sharing that with somebody, enjoy it. Myself, I'm going to be watching the Golden Girls and getting drunk because the Golden Girls are awesome. And that's a way I want to spend Valentine's Day. So without further ado, banana and out. I didn't hit the button again. I still can't hit the button.